My name is Andri Savva, and I lecture on courses related to visual arts and education to primary and pre-primary teachers in the Department of Education, University of Cyprus, for more than 20 years. I am living actually in a very small island, Cyprus, which is a member of European community, and this island is actually full of contradictions because the ancient and the contemporary coexist, is full of angels and devils, reality and myths, and it's about restrictions, certainly, but also beautiful sunsets. My hometown is the only city in Europe that is divided into parts due to the conflict and invasion happened almost 50 years ago. And in reality, this makes me view art in a certain way, teach and make research about art in a certain way. It's a restriction, actually. You never realize it until you go out of Cyprus that there is such a problem. And because I grew up in such a city, you view things in a different way. Cyprus, it was also a multicultural country. It was like that years ago and continues to be a multicultural country. But those conflicts that have been created and constructed make us really view the world in a different way. We have stereotypes sometimes. We feel that in every step we do, there is a kind of restriction because you don't really how can I explain it in English? You don't really feel that you live freely in your place. It is difficult, but it is difficult if you realize it, that these are restrictions in your life. Because if something is so familiar, you cannot really understand the situation and really understand that you are not a free person. All those things that because we live in a Mediterranean country and the way we express is very obvious in many ways, had an impact on me. And that's why my whole research and approach, it's quite it's about pedagogies that promote meaningful learning as a core aspect in my teaching and research. So a central component of meaningful art making for me is related to play. And when I'm talking about play art, I'm talking about playing with ideas, images, and materials. So play is a central concept of art education for my life, and it is a way of thinking as well. And that's why most of the time when I'm working with children or adults, I quite like open-ended art experiences. And because I find this as a significant way of expressing qualities of freedom. You are not doing art, for example, because somebody told you, because the teacher told you, or because an authority told you, but because you play. And there is much emphasis on the process than the final product. So for me, this is a capacity that you can find. This is a future, a characteristic that you can find to humans. It is, for me, art. It is a human action. It is a human creation. And it makes us more humane as well. So one of the core aspects of my work is related to play. And also because art is taking place in a specific space or place, it's quite related to what is around us. And the other very, very important aspect of my work is related to space and place. So I'm dealing with place-based approaches or playful approaches in art education. And for me, for example, art is a very, very complex concept. But when you realize that it is actually about human action, and you can find that it is quite truthful, and it is quite also inclusive, and the complexities of and meanings in art, and the way art acts in order to make us more creative. In many cases, functions functions in a different way and help us to overcome cultural conventions that are very, very significant for creating spaces in between, spaces that are more inclusive and more democratic. I think those two aspects that I explained before, play, for example, and more inclusive practices are very vital for offering qualities that cannot find in any other in any other scientific field. In my own view, what is very, very important for art educators to know in any part of the world is when we deal with art education, we deal with the individual and the collective self. We deal with spaces and places, and we deal with images in contemporary culture. And therefore, when we focus on those unique features that can be developed through the individual or collective experiences in art, we create at the same time creative citizens in democratic cultures. If you work for a long time in the field of art education, you can come to a conclusion that there are certain aspects that you need to teach in every part of the world, in every space that you are in, that you belong, because are essential part of yourself as a human being. So this is why I'm dealing with these aspects, because, and I'm trying to develop also pedagogies and methods that are appropriate for different age groups. And at the same time, I discovered that there are certain practices that can be inclusive, that every human being can participate. And this is also something that you need experience in order to understand the way that you can organize and implement inclusive practices that every human being and a child or an adult can participate in. Actually, there are many good practices that I can refer to. I prefer to go to those small stories occurring during a small project or a small case studies than refer to large projects, and most of the time projects that are involve people in competitions and things like that. But I have to admit that policy makers in Cyprus and art educators have worked quite hard to implement the new curriculum. And also there has been an approach to connect the two separate worlds, because we don't have a cultural policy an appropriate cultural policy to connect what is going inside the schools with what is going outside the schools in art education. But many of those art educations have tried hard, even during the COVID period, to implement visits to museums and connect children in any educational sector with museum practices. But referring to those small stories, I pick up some just a little details, because I can refer to many stories of many teachers that have been reported through different kind of policy documents. But in my opinion, what is significant to do is really connect those small stories with theories that are part of art education and embrace them as part of the formal curriculum, connect actually what happens inside the schools with the world of art outside the school, meaning that it is very essential to put some theory behind those stories. So personal stories that are part of my everyday life experience and not stories that belong to a large-scale projects are those stories that made me look at things in a different way. One such a story belongs to one of my students who was considered to be an outsider, but a very clever outsider, whose work has been an inspiration for me in many occasions. I remember that I asked once my students in the university to choose and represent through the use of objects, pedagogical terms like school, curriculum, creativity, and this student used pieces of a doll placed in a plate along with a fork and knife to illustrate the commercialization of the curriculum, and showed to me that all those things written in different documents from policymakers and academics, they are not connected, and the only way to connect those things is really working with artistic practices. And a second story, which I have never reported before, but certainly made me think a lot. It was when I was teaching it was an in-service training course for secondary school teachers, in which we tried to apply certain pedagogies related to contemporary artists and art. And I remember visiting the school and view all those impressive ideas from teenagers. And one student constructed an artwork by using broken pieces of a mirror, and in a way to reinforce the viewer to see himself or herself through multiple perspectives. And however, when she decided to install it in a public space in the school, the head teacher reacted really negatively and arguing that the artwork is not really an artwork, and that this is very dangerous for the students in the school. And when we as teachers and the academics that have been involved in this implementation argue for a debate, and there was a debate, the artwork was never installed in the school. And then I realized how difficult it is to work inside a formal education system, and realize that there is a lack of democratic culture in many schools, not allowing the art to flourish. I think these are the two stories that I can remember very right now. And it's very difficult to prioritize what is important for all art educators in the global world. But I will tell my own opinion. And I argue that the challenge for art education is not to differentiated approaches and theoretical positions, but it's to find a common ground that will enable us to initiate art practices that are very central to democracy. And which are those practices? This is a big question again, but in my own research, I discovered that there are certain aspects that are very, very essential in art education, and that make us as citizens to be more creative and more inclusive and more democratic. And these practices are related with our communities and ourselves, are related to spaces and places and the role of images in the contemporary society. And of course, if we want to offer art education, we have to offer also quality art education. And those qualities are very, very important because they can have an impact on the young generation. And when we offer quality experiences that every art educator argues that offers experiential learning, but we don't only have to offer experiential learning, we have to offer quality in our experiential learning. And such experiences for me can be found when we teach and learn art through exploring, through collaborating, and by using metaphors and appropriations in our work. In other words, more contemporary ways of making art. Even when we deal with the art of the past, we have to offer a more contemporary approach in dealing and teaching about the art of the past.
Yes, Andri, please.
Yes, it is quite correct because we live in a contemporary world, and we need to approach art in a contemporary way, even if we're dealing with the art of the past, which is very, very essential again. We need to have a holistic approach and connect the past and the present. But we need to work towards contemporary methods and contemporary approaches in order to do that. They are dealing with different way of thinking, and we are teachers, and we need to approach their work through contemporary tools, and we need to work as art educators to find out ways and methods in order to approach the children in their spaces and places, and teaching them the history of the past and the present by using, of course, artistic thinking and artistic practices. And certainly there are many, many things that we can do in order to improve those methods as teachers and use them for learning art. And certainly there are many other disciplines that they are dealing with learning, and it is very essential to bring those aspects that are central to learning and create methods, because we lack, we have so many ideas to implement things, but we need to find the ways in order to implement those things. And that's why I think play is one of the essential aspects of art education, and it is a method. We can use play in order to help children to understand the artwork better and understand themselves better. What I know is that this play is universal. Children there is a need to play as a child, and there is a need to play as an artist, and there is a need to play as a human being generally. It is a human right. But of course, there are many ways to understand the concept of play in many parts of the world, which is something very, very difficult to understand if you don't have the sense of belonging, if you don't belong to a place and interact with the others in order to see how they play and how they interact with each other. But from my own research, I discovered that it is very essential to put play in a context because it is a way of communication, and it can tell you a lot about the person and how this person interacts with the rest of the world. Play is inclusive, can be an inclusive practice. It can be also an exclusive practice. But in art, it seems that when I'm working, especially with children, it seems that play is an inclusive practice, and especially in art. They want to participate in those participatory ways of thinking. For them, it is a play to interact with others and feel that they play and not really making some kind of work. I started working on this aspect to make more inclusive practices means to create more inclusive spaces. And more inclusive spaces and more inclusive practices implying more play than anything else. And so I realized through the video analysis and all those practices that we have implemented in schools and in museums, that people, when they come together and play, they create art, and at the same time they all participated. They don't feel that are outsiders, but they collaborate with each other and they interact. And the final product is also impressive in many cases. And in order to create more inclusive practices, we have to create more inclusive spaces. And that's what is very challenging for me at this moment, because I believe that it's very, very easy to do it. And it's very creative as well. And it can really changes the way we think about art at the same time.
Yeah, and about it.
You are a viewer and you are the creator as well, and you interact with other people, and you have something that you really enjoy. And then when you reflect, you realize all those aspects that I can be a creator, I can be a viewer, I can really make something, and I can change the environment, I can transform the environment. So you got a power to do things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I used to play a lot when I was a child. And I think that was a form of freedom that makes me realize a lot of things around. And that's why I argue that in order to make more inclusive practices, we have to create more inclusive spaces and also invite people to play inside those spaces. It's an easy way of transforming those spaces and make people feel this kind of power and freedom. In many cases, we can invite artists, we can invite parents, we can invite grandmothers and grandfathers. There's a whole community of the school. We have schools that children do not interact between them. I mean, we have to start from there. And then, of course, because when you create a space, parents can view this, and when they're invited to play, they can play with their children. And this is also something that makes them more humane. They feel something, they have emotions about this. And it is very, very essential in this era, in this period of time, because we have passed a lot, and we need to find a place to express ourselves and to interact with each other and feel again that we are humans and not machines. But it's not a very difficult thing, you know. If you change the minds of the people, the mindset, and
Yeah.
especially when you work with very, very young children, you have the time and the space to do that. Thank you too.